Hello everyone, and welcome to an exciting tutorial where we're going to be covering using the Python programming language to create video games. Video games, despite being fun and mostly for hobby, are actually some of the most complex and challenging things to code and program, especially in this day and age. So think about your favorite current generation games, something like Battlefield 4, Grand Theft Auto 5, or something like that, or maybe it's another game, but chances are all of these games that you might think of incorporate, first of all, just incredible graphics engines, impressive artificial intelligence, and pretty intricate physics, and that's just to start. Then obviously they've got plot lines and action and user friendliness and all of this. But all these things are actually really complex things to code, each in their own right, and then to make a really great video game you've got to combine all of those things. So naturally this not only makes game development a fantastic topic to consider when learning a programming language, but it also makes it a very challenging topic to tackle because you have to learn about all of these things at once. So this is where Python can come in, and it actually helps to make the experience quite nice. So Python is a fairly programmer-friendly or fairly newbie-friendly programming language, especially with its syntax. So even if you're not already an experienced developer in Python, or maybe you've never even programmed once in your life in Python, you should be able to at least follow along. But chances are, if you were to look at some code, besides understanding the purpose of functions and all of this, but you should be able to understand the syntax, what's happening. You've got while statements, and usually the while statement is pretty black and white. You understand what it's asking, an if statement, and that kind of thing. And then for loops, generally, unless they're written to be a little bit obfuscated, are generally easy to understand, or at least they can be written to be easily understood. So with that, it is somewhat expected that you have a basic understanding of programming, specifically with Python, throughout this tutorial series. However, if you don't yet know Python or any programming language, the series might be a bit of a challenge for you, but you should actually still be able to follow along. And if anything, you can always just copy the code. But you should be able to follow along and actually understand what's happening, because again, Python is pretty user-friendly, and someone from the outside can pretty quickly grasp it. And that's why I think that Python is such a great language to start with, and learning to develop games is actually a pretty good way to embark on your journey as a programmer, because it will cover a lot of topics. It's actually somewhat exciting and rewarding to make your first video game, and so obviously that's good. Understand or have Python already installed, and because they've used it before. I assume that most of you are in that scenario, but I know that some people maybe have not already got Python installed, so I'm going to run through that really quickly. So if you don't have it already installed, you're going to want to head to python.org, go to downloads, and then basically we're using Python 3, so download your specific. If you're not on Windows right now with me, chances are this looks a little bit different for you, but for whatever you're on, download your version for Python. Once you have it installed, it's pretty easy to use. For the purposes of this video, I like to program in the default Python IDE, and so for anyone that isn't sure what that is, you can go to your start bar and then Python 3.4, and then you click on IDLE, and that should bring up a window just like this. You could also search for Python, and you can bring up a window like this. Then what I do is I go File, New File, and that opens up a blank document. From here, I can go File, Save As, and then we can save something like here, example.py. We could save over that. So save as example.py, and now I've got a blank text document that I can start to program Python in. So for example, we could just have it print a real quick hello, and we can save and run that, and it prints hello to console. So this is the environment that we're going to be programming in, and that's how you can get into that environment. Other than that, not too much else to say on Python. So let's go ahead and grab PythonGame now. So head over to pygame.org, and this should be where you land. And then basically the same thing that we just did with Python, we're going to head over to downloads. And this is where things are going to be a little bit different depending on what kind of operating system you're on. I happen to be on a Windows operating system, so I would probably use one of these Windows downloads. That said, the current version of Python is 3.4, and the most current version of a downloader that they have for Windows is 3.2. So this is kind of, this is not good because unless you don't have to be intermediate or anything, but you have to know how to change the setup path, because this is going to look for C:/Python 32, not 34. So there's, luckily for us, a really easy remedy, and they actually list it right here on the page, and it's this right here. So you can head to this guy's website, and what he does is he creates these binaries for 64-bit Windows, but he actually has releases for more than just 64 bits. So we're going to head there now. And as you can see, we actually have the 64-bit up here, but then we also have the 32-bit installers down here, all the way up to Python 3.4. If you happen to be watching this after the fact, and maybe 3.5 is out or 3.8 is out or whatever out on some of these places' websites. So anyway, it's a really great website. I definitely suggest that you go ahead and save this website somewhere, because it's not just for Pygame, it's for a whole bunch of modules. Pretty much all of the most popular modules you're going to find here, basically all of these modules. So there's a lot of modules here. So anyway, if you're on Windows, we want to use Pygame, and well, I guess I could just re-enter this link. And so then you'll want to download whichever one you have, so either 64-bit Windows would download 3.4 or 32-bit right here, and download and install. Obviously, if you are on some sort of Linux distribution or Mac OS, then you'll want to download either using the source. You should be able to do apt-get Python, Pygame. So download whichever way that you prefer to download. So anyway, with that, let's go ahead and get started here. So now we're in the IDLE for Python. This is the basic text editor / IDE for Python. And now we're ready to begin coding. Once you've downloaded and installed Pygame, you should be able to, in fact, hold on, let's make my text a little slightly bigger here. 22, there we go. Once you have everything downloaded and installed for Pygame, you can go import and then Pygame. And real quick, go ahead and you can either go run and run module, or you can just hit F5, and you'll probably get one of these little boxes that asks or tells you basically you need to save it. So we'll just hit OK. And just make sure that you can import Pygame. If you can't, it'll throw an error. So we'll say Pygame blah. Because we don't have that module, it's going to throw an error. It'll say like this, no module named. So if you incorrectly installed Pygame, you'll get something like that. So if you've correctly installed it, you won't have any problems. So let's go ahead and talk about some of the most basic things to Pygame in setting up our Pygame instance. The first thing that we want to do is we want to initiate Pygame and basically all of the other modules that come with Pygame. So this is necessary, it's basically as necessary as the import, and it needs to be the first Pygame action that you take. So without getting too in-depth into classes and object-oriented programming, it's just like a class where you have to initiate it. So we're going to go ahead and go pygame.init, which is short for initiate, and that's it. So we basically just say, hey, look, we're going to be programming with Pygame now. Let's go ahead and get everything started. The next thing is Pygame is going to come up with some sort of screen. Okay, so we want to set our display, and we can pick the resolution of our display. And really the correct word for display is actually going to be surface, and because it's returning a pygame.surface object. So let's go ahead and we're going to use a variable, and we're going to call it surface, and surface is going to equal pygame.display.set_mode. And then we have one parameter. So this is a function. Like I said, if you're not too familiar with Python, try to ease into what's happening. But then if you are familiar with Python, I don't want to hold everyone back. So we'll try to take this kind of quick. If at any time you kind of feel lost, you might want to hit the basics of Python again. But Anyway, so we're defining the surface variable as, and it's equal to pygame.display.setMode, and all setMode is, well, with the first parameter anyway, is going to be a resolution, and it's going to be 700, and we're actually, let's do 800 by 400, so it will be 800 pixels wide and 400 pixels tall. And note the double parentheses here. So this is the first parameter, so it's a tuple. Okay, so just make sure you have two parentheses here. So moving on, because like this is a whole parameter. If you didn't have it, it would treat 800 as a parameter and 400 as a parameter. Moving on, you probably gonna want to like title the window just like up here, like at the title or at the top of your window. For Python IDE, it says Python the version and then the file name. We kind of want to do the same thing, only we're gonna name it the same name as our game. And so for us, the game that we're going to be making is just a basic game. It's kind of like Flappy Bird, which Flappy Bird obviously is not an original game. You've got Flappy Bird, which is kind of like a game called Helicopter, and there's just a bunch of helicopter type games out there. And the notion that most people understand nowadays is Flappy Bird. So you're just basically trying to avoid obstacles, and you can only basically, the only command that you can enter is an upward motion, and then when you're not entering upward motion, you're falling. And so that's the idea of the game. And so our game, we're gonna call it Helicopter. So we're gonna say pygame.display.set underscore, and the word for this is caption. I'm not too sure why we want to call it a caption, because to me I think of a caption under a picture or something, but this is actually what's going to change our title for us, and we're going to call it Helicopter. Hello and welcome to part 5 of our Pygame tutorial video series. Now that we have a helicopter that we can control, we have some boundaries in place that we can have causing some sort of crash and game over, and we've got now sort of a message to our screen that says, hey, you died, press the key to continue. We could use this for other messages. Now we're ready to add some obstacles for us to avoid. Now for this, we're going to use blocks that we literally use Pygame to draw. So like I said before, you can create your own images basically that you want to add to the screen, or you can use Pygame to draw all sorts of things like balls and rectangles and squares and all this, or custom polygons entirely. And so that's what we're going to do today, is be covering how to draw things to the screen. So first, let's talk about what the end goal is, and let's work up to that end goal. So our end goal here is that we want to have two blocks, right? So you've got a block on top and some blocks on bottom, and they come together, but they only open up a slight gap for us to fly our helicopter through. And that's the whole point of the game, is to fly the helicopter through those gaps without hitting the block on top or the bottom. So that's our end goal. So first we know that we have to draw some blocks to our screen. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to create a function here, and this function we're going to call we're going to call it blocks. And blocks are going to have the following parameters. You have the location of the block, and then you've got how wide is the block and how tall is the block. Okay, so we have quite a few things here. So we've got x underscore block, we'll say that's the x location of the block, and then y underscore block, that's the y location of the block. And then we've got block underscore width, that's how wide the block is, and block underscore height, that's how tall the block is. And then we have a final parameter, which is gap. How large of a gap do we want to have? And we could hard code gap as well, but one of the methods for us to add difficulty or decrease difficulty for the game is by changing gap. So there's a couple of different things that we could do. We could make the helicopter larger, throughout the game, but that would be kind of silly because the helicopter can't gain size. But we can make the gaps smaller or larger based on difficulty. And then there's only one other major thing that we could, well, I guess there's two more things that we could do. We could make blocks a little bit wider. So right now you just have to maintain through that gap, but if you made the blocks really wide, that would make the gap even longer to have to fly through. So you could do that. And then finally we could speed up the frames per second, so we can make things happen a lot faster. So there's a lot of different variables that we can edit to make this game more challenging or less challenging. So for all of those things, it's a really good idea to go ahead and make those variables rather than hard coding those as well. So anyway, moving on. Gap, colon, and now we're ready to add everything into our function. So for this, we draw, basically we're going to draw two blocks. Okay, so I suppose the best way for me to explain this, maybe pull up Paint and show you guys real quick. Okay, so let's say this is our background, and we've got our helicopter here, and we're flying, and we want to avoid blocks, and those blocks might be something like this. Like we've got a block here, and then we have another block here, and it makes for a little bit of a gap there that we're supposed to fly the helicopter through. So when we go to draw these via PythonGame, we have a couple of different things here that we're trying to do. One is this gap, one is the gap. How big of the gap, is the gap going to be? And then we have a block number 1 here that we draw this block, and then we have a gap here, and then we draw this block, okay? And so we're drawing two blocks, and the gap we're not actually drawing, but we just need to kind of calculate that, so when we draw the second one, we actually have a gap between these two blocks. So just a quick example there with Paint. So that's what we want to do. So this function is going to literally just draw two blocks for us. So to do that, we use PythonGame. And built into PythonGame, we have pygame.draw.rectangle, so that's how we draw a rectangle. Where do we want to draw the rectangle? We want to draw that to surface. What color do we want that rectangle to be? We'll make that white. And now we have the dimensions of our rectangle. So we've got X location, Y location, how wide, and how tall. That's how you draw a rectangle. So we've got X location, and this needs to be in a list form. So we'll use square brackets for the list. So X underscore block, Y underscore block, so the X and Y coordinates, then block width, comma, block height. I'll hold here for a second just for anybody who wants to kind of check that this all adds up. So again, where do we draw it? Surface. What color do we want it? White. When do we want it? Now. No. Then we have the X location, Y location, width, and height. So then we do the exact same thing again. So I'm actually going to go, let's fix our thing here. I'm going to do copy, paste, because we want to draw two blocks. Now, there's just one more thing that we want to change, and that is for the second block that we draw, we want to come over here, and in fact, maybe I'll make this slightly smaller so everything's on screen for this, since this can be kind of confusing. So these two are exactly the same. So this would draw two blocks in the identical location. And we know we don't want that. We want this one, let's say the first one is the one that we draw at the top, and then we want the second one to actually be the one that we draw on the bottom. So how do we get around that? Well, we want the X and X location to be the same, right? Because we want them to travel together horizontally, but vertically they want to be in different positions. So to do that, we'll say Y block. So the Y location will be the Y location plus block underscore height plus the gap. And what that will do is add, which moves it down a little bit. So it moves it down by the gap and then by the block height. So that will allow us to draw a block with a perfect, it'll be away from the first block by that block's height. So it starts drawing it by that block's height lower, then adds the gap lower, so that creates our gap, and then draws that block. So that's how we can get away with that. So in theory, we actually have a block that goes out of the screen, but that's okay because we don't actually have, we can't go out of the screen ourselves as well. So we'll leave that, and that is all we have to code for our blocks, for our block code.